Our podcast today is on the work of Peter Brown, The Yoga of Radiant Presence. Joining us for this discussion is John Astin and Dena Evans. John Astin is a dedicated teacher and practitioner deeply influenced by the teachings of Peter Brown and the Yoga of Radiant Presence. Known for his profound insights into the nature of awareness and reality, John weaves Peter's teaching into his work, inviting students into the direct experience of the ever-present luminous nature of existence.
What turns out to be a really illuminating, fascinating, potentially life-changing a question to ask, which is, what is my experience? What is actually happening? Yes, I have words to describe my experience, seemingly, whether I call it fear or joy or sorrow or heartbreak or aliveness or whatever ways I might be characterizing things with my words and my concepts. What's actually present? What's actually happening? And we can explore that. We can explore our experience in the same way a scientist might get curious about how the world is made, like what things are made of scientifically. You know, things are made of molecules, and the molecules are made of atoms, and the atoms are made of subatomic particles. There's this really fascinating and, in my experience, kind of life-changing, similar exploration we can take up, which is, what is our human experience? In the same way, like what makes our human experience what we think it is? Like what is it made of? In the same way, again, a scientist might explore what the material world is made of. What is it made of? And that exploration is it's fun, it's eye-opening, it's and it reveals, in my experience, that this reality, this experience that we're having, is much, 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 much more than we could possibly imagine. It's filled with so much more than the mind could ever conceive, and discovering that is it's very enriching. It's very life transforming. It's very freeing.
Dena Evans brings her heartfelt connection to Peter Brown's Yoga of Radiant Presence into her life. With a deep appreciation for Peter's unique approach to awakening, Dena offers guidance that reflects her emphasis on effortlessly resting in the boundless clarity and the fullness of being.
Everything is real, but nothing is what you think it is. Nothing is what you can think it is. So find out what it is. Find out what it is before you tell it what it is, before you name it, before you describe it, before you compare it. That's the essence of the exploration, as John was talking about. And explore it like a good scientist explores it. You know, a good scientist doesn't go into an experiment with an idea of what he wants to prove. He goes in not knowing. Let's see what this is. Let's see what happens. And so everything is real, but it's not what you think it is. What is it? So check out your experience for yourself, and notice there are things you can notice. For example, you'll notice that whatever you think it is, or whatever you can say about it, what it actually is far transcends that.
Well, you want to kick it off, Stefan?
I did a deep dive today on Mr. Astin's Zoom call from yesterday or a couple of days ago. And of course, you were naturally in seventh heaven. I know you don't believe in seventh heaven, but you know, there was a glow on your face. And I checked you out, Dena. Did you feel the vibration? So I discovered that you're a photographer and you have a Smug Mug account, which is also the same place that I post all my professional photography. So we have that in common. Anyway, I discovered something. I used my dear friend ChatGPT. I wanted to compare your philosophies, the Peter Brown philosophy, the Ati Yoga philosophy, to something like Ramana Maharshi, because I wanted to know where I was getting this wrong, or not wrong, not understanding it. So what came back to me was that what you guys are explaining really is an exploratory thing that the mind has to conceive in order to understand it, which I don't. I understand feeling, sense, meditation, all of that. If it were not for meditation, which a lot of these things, like Peter Brown had said that he doesn't believe in meditation. We had a guest on the other day just before you, doesn't meditate. Gary doesn't meditate anymore. Okay. But for me, I find my place in that stillness when I go really deep. And that's where I have my experience. With that said, I am open to everything you're about to talk about, and I welcome it because it is an amazing journey that you guys are on. And the more I find out about it, perhaps my mind, my left brain will pick it up and resonate with it. So welcome to our first podcast with our new name, Seekers and Finders Podcast. So we're asking everybody to take the step. And here we go. We are now going to take the step.
I just wanted to say something that I think, Stefan, in response to a few things you said that I think is important in all of this, which is if we're going to have a conversation about anything, to have a sense of what the words are that we're using and what they mean, what we see them to mean, what we understand them to mean. And even if a lot of what Dean and I are probably going to end up talking about is the impossibility of words to convey the nature of reality. At the same time, when you use a word like meditation, if you want to talk about how you feel about meditation and how that might compare to what we think of meditation, it all depends on what you mean by meditation, for one thing. Also, what you see, what one sees as the purpose of meditation. Like what do you see it leading towards, if anything? What is that exactly? Because you talked about how you feel it's really something that's important in your own journey of exploration. But the fact that, say, I might not recommend meditation per se, at the same time, there's another way in which even this conversation is meditation, you see? So it very much depends upon what we're talking about by that word. If meditation is, from my standpoint, about discovering what the nature of reality is, that's the purpose of any spiritual practice, in my view. It's not about getting into a particular state. It's about discovering what this is, discovering truth, what is true about reality. Again, other people may define it differently, but I'm just saying that's how I see it. There are an infinite number of doorways into discovering what this is, what reality is, and our relationship to that reality and who we are, if you will. And yeah, I think different styles of what is conventionally called meditation can be a powerful doorway into that discovery, to be sure. So again, to have a conversation about something like spiritual practices of any kind, let's talk about what do we mean by those practices exactly, because they could mean many. I mean, look at the word yoga. What does that mean? Are we talking about the different limbs of yoga? Are we talking about hatha yoga? Are we talking about the yoga of inquiry? Are we talking about the yoga of devotion? Are we talking about the kinds of food somebody eats? It could be so many things. So it can end up being not all that productive to talk about something like these practices, again, if we don't unpack a little bit about what they actually mean to us, if that makes sense.
Right. But I don't want to get off the path that we were going to discuss today, which was the continuation, I guess, of your understanding of Peter Brown's philosophy, how you're involved with it. That's the whole point of this particular podcast today. As far as the other things about meditation and everything, I don't want to get sidetracked there. I only brought it up because I wanted to explain myself to you specifically, John. Dena and I really have not had a conversation yet, but in our last conversation, I had posed some things to you that were I didn't understand. So I just wanted to tell you that I'm a little further down the road in understanding it. But my point of view to what I'm looking for is okay to be different from your point of view or Dena's point of view or Gary's, because it is my individual journey that I'm on, and how I see the truth, how I see consciousness unfolding for me is my experience. Your truth is yours. And I would never deny that that's your truth. And, bless you for that. You've come into a deep understanding that most people do not have yet or are looking for. And it's brought you to a certain point that you can live your life with that understanding. Now, I did have one question. Pleasure and pain. How do you experience those two items? Because it is a physical experience, and it's something that brings a sense of something on both sides. Pain can be really debilitating, and pleasure can be ecstatic. So, in your philosophy, or the philosophy of Peter Brown, how do we see one's participation with pain and pleasure?
We can circle back to that question specifically, but first, similar to the word meditation, because I had the same sort of reaction and response to that as John, like depends on what you mean by meditation. But to me, Peter, what we talk about and what Peter talked about, it wasn't a philosophy. I mean, you can talk in philosophical terms, you can talk sort of in that dimension, and it can be interesting. I had a few philosophical conversations with Peter, but I think what Peter is more pointing to, and I think what John and I are trying to point to in the book group, is that what this is, what you are, transcends any philosophy. You can think about it, say about it, fit it into. And so the constant reminder, the yoga in this case, is just continuing to coming back to the felt direct nature of experience. That's where the money is. That's where the answers are, you could say. So it's a little bit not interesting to talk about philosophy, because philosophy can never capture what this is. And like I said, it's not that philosophical conversations can't at times be interesting. It's interesting to talk about political conversations or the world or sports or smug mug. Like all of those conversations can be interesting. But for me, and I think for Peter, and I think John would agree with this, there's nothing more interesting than coming back to the direct experience of what this is, which can't be captured in a philosophy.
Okay, good. But why does he title his book The Yoga of Radiant Presence? Why doesn't he just have a blank cover and not call it anything if there's nothing to pinpoint it about? Why are there words in the book? Why does he have to I know what you're trying to get at, but I still want to understand why there is some labels there that needed to be said for understanding, and why he titled the book. And you were talking about the word yoga can be used in many ways, John. Why it's titled The Yoga of Radiant Presence.
Well, he had his own very specific, if you will, definition of yoga. And that particular yoga that he came up with that name. And he would be quick, by the way, to say, in the case of radiant presence, which were these two words he used to try to capture the essence of reality in one sense, even though he knew and talked explicitly endlessly about the impossibility of capturing it in language. He picked those two words because he felt that they were potentially evocative and in some ways captured as well as words can something that's very primal about reality, about this, whatever we want to call this, the mystery of life. And we can talk about what he meant by those words. I mean, I think Dean and I would be happy to kind of unpack those words, radiant presence, if you'd like us to. But yeah, I mean, yeah, he came up with a name for his approach to this, and he called it a yoga, but it was really a yoga of exploration. And the yoga was not in the least philosophical, as Dena was saying. It was experiential, I would say.
Right.
He talked about, he said, what all the scriptures are fundamentally about is experience, which is the only thing we can actually investigate, is what's actually showing up right now in this moment that we describe as our human experience or our experience, and all the different seeming aspects of that experience. And the yoga was really, what is it? Let's not assume, because we have language to describe seemingly so much of what's here experientially. The sort of starting point for his yoga was to not assume that we know what it is simply because we have language. And that's a tricky aspect to this, because our language sort of is very facile. It's very powerful in the sense of it does tend to lead us to believe that, oh, because I have words to seemingly capture a lot of what's going on, we tend to believe that we actually do know what's going on because we have language to seemingly capture it, convey it to ourselves, convey it to other people. But the essence of the yoga was exploring experience, you could say, on its own terms, and discovering what it is outside of the context of what we think it is. And I think the way Peter would put it is that what we come to discover is that our experience, or reality, if you want to call it that, is inherently transcendental. It's inherently infinite in its nature, infinite in its being unresolvable as to what it actually is. The essence of it, the nature of it is, as a physicist would say about the material world, it's indeterminate. Like I can't get to the bottom of what it is. And he talked beautifully and eloquently and pointed to this and invited exploration into discovering how our interpretive frameworks, all the ways we seem able to language reality and conceive of it, will always miss the mark, because the nature of a concept and language, sort of its handmaiden, to express concepts, is that it puts a frame of reference around it. It defines that's what a definition does. It defines the limits of what something is. If I were to define you, I'm essentially, this is who Stefan is. I'm putting the limit around what you are. That's my definition, right? Mm-hmm. And through this yoga that Peter shared, and we share in each in our own unique ways, Dena and myself, can reveal that what's happening here absolutely, profoundly, and radically transcends everything we could possibly conceive of in terms of what it is. And in the context of spiritual language, if you will, that's the liberating thing to discover, that this reality transcends everything that we think of it to be. Just our everyday so-called normal experience is completely transcendental in the sense of not being resolvable as to what it actually is.
So it would be better than using the word spiritual, which kind of puts quotes around it and designates certain. It's more the understanding of the meaning of life and the truth behind it, wouldn't you say? That's more than just following a spiritual path.
Well, I would say the essence of what John and I talk about, it's the essence would be, what is this? not from the sense of like, how can we talk about it? How can we describe it? How can we name it? Not the content of this, but what is it? What is experience itself? I mean, we all know what experience is. That's the only thing that is ever happening, is we're having an experience, and we're used to orienting to our experience from a place of talking about what it is, what we think it is. We can describe it, we can make a story of it, we can have a philosophy about what's happening in our experience. But the yoga, as Peter talks about it, and as I think John and I talk about it, it's not so much talking about what it is, but getting to the essence of what is it, which can't be put into words, as John was saying. You just keep finding this unresolvable, unpin downable, uncapturable nature of everywhere you look in experience. And so the yoga is looking, the word that Peter would always use is noticing what is experience itself. And to me, that's the only practice, if there is one, that there is. What is this?
I just want to make a quick linking point here, because I know both your show and your own interest around spirituality. Just to make a link there, if I could, and that is that if you think about different spiritual traditions, they're talking about things like the transcendent, they're talking about the divine and the sacred and God. And in the case of yoga, discovering our fundamental oneness with that divinity, Brahman in the Sanskrit, and we're actually not talking about anything different from that, actually. It's just we're approaching it in a you could say a unique way. Peter is obviously as well. But this exploration of experience, from my standpoint, reveals the transcendent, divine, absolute reality. It's what it reveals. Your normal, my normal, our everyday normal, what we think of as everyday experience, is the divine. It is the transcendent. Peter used to say, your everyday experience is what all the fuss is about, what all the stuff you read about in all the spiritual traditions. It's nothing more than your actual ordinary, so-called mundane human experience. It's just that because of the way we tend to think about it and describe it, our descriptions, he would say, function to essentially oversimplify and dumb reality down. That's part of their function, in a way, is to take this infinity that's here right now and collapse it into something sort of seemingly manageable and describable, and we can talk about and communicate about it. But what we're actually partaking of is limitless. It is complete, unlimited in its nature. And by any other word, that's a pretty good description of God, the unlimited, the absolute. And so in that sense, we could say that the yoga of radiant presence belongs in the category of spirituality, if you want to say that. It's just that it's approaching it in a unique way, which I, of course, very much resonate with, which is, okay, a lot of spiritual paths, and I was involved in many for many, many years myself, where my starting point was, I'm a human being, I'm an individual, and I'm reading about these amazing spiritual experiences and finding God and self-realization. And so I'm approaching it from that way. Nothing was wrong with any of that. But what I love about, Peter's yoga is, let's not start from it with any assumptions whatsoever, without any ideas of spirituality or God or anything. I mean, those can all be there, but let's come back to what we can say we can be certain about, which is that here we are. Like, here is this. This moment is here. That's irrefutable that something's happening. So let's just start from that. That's what we have to, in a sense, work with in our yoga, which is what seems to be here. And let's investigate it experientially. Let's explore it. And just as it turns out, what we find is the great good news that all of our experience is this transcendental, radiant, unimaginably profound call it divinity, the basis of everything, the source of everything, you could say. So I just wanted to make that kind of linking point between, again, it's both very different as kind of an approach that you might find compared, if you will, to other sort of spiritual teachings and approaches, but in other ways is just yet another doorway into the discovery of this astonishing, miraculous presence of life or God, if you want to call it God. Anyway, that's just
and I would add to that last sentence in terms of it being a doorway and not different from, what all of the great spiritual traditions are ultimately pointing at. I happen to think that the yoga, the way that Peter presented it, is the most efficient doorway. It's the most direct, the direct exploration of what this is, that I've come across, that I've seen.
So you get up every day and you live your life with this idea that has been expressed to you that you're feeling resonant to, a oneness with. But how has your life changed intellectually for your day-to-day living? And as an example, I'll just say, when I get up in the morning out of sleep, I have a remembrance of who I am. Whatever I was in the dream world no longer is there. I get up in the morning, I have a remembrance of me being this being who is feeling the remnants of my practice over the years, the vibrations in my body, the peace in my mind, the peace in my gut. I can go there when I get up. And as I go through the day, my experiences are based on that place that I'm sitting in, because I've practiced to get there. It's like Eckhart Tolle talks about living in the present moment. Now, I want to know how this takes root in you and what your experience is. How do you live your daily thing under this umbrella?
For me, the same way I always did. There's really, I mean, at one very real level, to answer your question, nothing is different. Like, there's only the present moment. So where else would I be but the present moment? Even if I tried to get out of the present moment, I couldn't get out of the present moment. And I no longer have a story that my moment to moment, ordinary, mundane life isn't the same thing as absolute divinity. There's that story is not there anymore. And so I guess in that sense, you could say the implications of what this exploration has revealed are significant, because that's a very different that's a very different way of orienting to experience than, say, orienting to it from the standpoint of, I'm just little old Dena, and there's this discovery of self-realization that I want to make, and there's these things I need to do to get there. That's a whole different orientation than seeing that, oh, this is it too. This is what all the fuss is about, as Peter would say. But in another sense, it's exactly the same. I'm living a human life just like I always did. There's no difference.
So with your opinions about things, do you make judgments about things, about people, about circumstances? Does that have a different approach to your life before you may have judged somebody about something and you say, you know what, I think that guy is terrible, or blah, 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 blah. But now, living in the idea that you have, does it take on a different form? That's what I'm trying to get at here. If you're living your life every day as and nothing's changed except your idea of how life is, are you still experiencing, having opinions about things, making judgments about things? How does that work?
Of course, I have preferences. There's a human dimension here that's very real. The experience of that is very real. So Dena has preferences, Dena has judgments, Dena has opinions. I guess the difference is there's not a heavy-handed surety about what any of that is, about what Dena is, about what good is, about what bad is, about what pain is, about what pleasure is. There's I know that I can't know what any of that is. I know the unresolvable nature of anything that I put a label on. And so the implication of that is all of that is just held a lot more lightly. I recognize the amorphousness, you could say, of all of those definitions and all of those limits that I put around any of that. So it's harder to take it seriously. It's harder to take it, it's a matter of, I know that I can't know what reality is. I can't know what any of those things are cognitively in words and definitions, but in another very real sense, it's the only thing I've ever known. Like I'm completely engaged with what this is. I just can't say what it is.
Right.
So
Okay.
it allows for a much more playful existence, you could say, a much more relaxed existence, you could say, but that doesn't mean sometimes it doesn't look like I might get pissed off that someone cuts me off in traffic. Like it looks like that sometimes.
Right.
But there's not the heavy-handed, I am like this, and I like this, and I don't like that, and I want this to happen. There's more of a, how can I know? So
Yes,
let's,
you're not taking life seriously the way you used to before with all of these dogmatic things that we were raised on. It's more, as you say, a lightheartedness where you're able to see and unfold before you the next step without getting caught up in it.
maybe, I would, I guess, agree. Again, we're using words, and words are always tricky because, they never really capture the essence of anything. So I try to be careful in the way I use words, but also, words are just words. So take words lightly. But I would say, yeah, there's not a serious, there's not the sense that so much is at stake in what happens moment to moment, day to day. But that doesn't mean, and when I say I hold it lightly, that doesn't mean there's not a real sincere engagement with life, with my experience. If anything, it allows me to be more wholeheartedly, fully engaged in my experience because the stakes aren't as high. There's a more of a, I don't know, it's like I was just saying in the meeting earlier, it's almost like kind of being lucid in a dream. Like the dream continues. I could still be being chased by a tiger and, the dream character is running for her life. But there's also the realization that, oh, this is just a dream. Like, so I can be fully involved in the dream and yet not limited to the dream, not captured by the dream, not taken by the dream, which is where the suffering comes from. When I see that, oh, this is just reality appearing the way it looks right now. And in a second, it's going to be appearing a different way. And in another second, it's going to be appearing a different way. So there's less need for it to be a certain way.
Right.
I just wanted to respond to your question, and then thanks for sharing that. How you spoke about that was beautiful. What I was saying earlier, what we were talking about earlier of the, when we look at experience, we can begin to appreciate, discover how it transcends our ideas about it because it's it's infinite and our ideas are finite. So it just, right, it won't be squeezed into our conceptual frameworks. The implications of that, which I think is partly what you're trying to get a sense of in our human lives, for me, sometimes I put it in this way. It's less suffering and it's more enjoyment, okay, in a very profound sense. And if I had to try to like unpack the mechanics of that, I would say our languaging of things, our conceptualizing about things, it's a great tool. Like it's an amazing tool, like making maps of reality and then using those maps to sort of navigate around reality. Fantastic, nothing wrong inherently. But if we believe that those maps are actually capturing reality, because they function by, they do two things. They oversimplify this infinite complexity and vastness. But they can also, in their seeming to be able to resolve what things are, this is how problems arise. the perception that there's problems that exist and that those problems require some sort of navigation or resolution or fixing. I mean, this is suffering, right? Something's wrong and I have this sense that something's out of place and wrong and broken, and now I got to go about somehow resolving and fixing it. Well, when you see from this one, if you will, the transcendental perspective that this can't be collapsed into anything that we think, you're discovering a perspective on reality that's free of problem. It's free of there's anything to resolve. There's nothing there to fix. There's nothing there to resolve. There's just this effulgence, this just absolute radiance. So that's one like having access to that as a way of sitting, if you will, inside of this reality or being with this reality is to discover it's free from this standpoint of lack and limitation and problem. Because there's not something there lacking. It's just unlimited, right? So that's the less suffering part. The more enjoyment part or an aspect of it is that this is much better than we could possibly think of it. It's like it's boundlessly rich. It's fathomlessly like luscious and juicy and alive and endlessly. There's no end to how rich this is. That's its infinity. It's boundless in its infinity. The Tibetans say it's a treasure trove of profound, richness and benefit. Every moment is that. So when we discover through this kind of inquiry or yoga, whatever you want to call it, that this transcends the imagined limitations that the mind places on it, it transcends it. It opens us up to taste the fathomless richness of it, the boundlessness of it. We get to partake of that. We are partaking of it already right now, like because we are that infinite richness. But we get to appreciate it more when we start to notice it, essentially. And so that's the more enjoyment piece, which is even amazingly some of the gritty human stuff that can be really painful in a human context, like I've experienced grief, over loss that not that long ago that was, I would say, profoundly painful, like in a human, like I just felt like I lost something so valuable that was just like heart-wrenching and heartbreaking. And there was no denying that aspect of it, but there was also this way to, if you will, be with it. I mean, again, hold it lightly in terms of languaging this stuff, but like discovering something else about it, which was its radiance. Like even this intense grief was this aliveness and this vitality and this beauty, quite frankly, and this inconceivable miracle. And everything is that inconceivable miracle, including the difficult, gritty kind of human stuff. And I think that's part of why, at least for me, as Dena was saying, there's this sense of like more openness to the full spectrum of the human experience, because that tendency we may have as humans to kind of close down and protect ourselves and guard ourselves and defend ourselves against, the vicissitudes of life, the slings and arrows of life. It's not that we just are like foolhardy necessarily, but it's more like there really isn't anything to protect ourselves against, because there's the things we imagine to be threats are not the threats we imagine them to be. Most of them. They're more of this inconceivable, profound radiance of life itself. And so I remember when I was going through that period of intense grief, and some friends and family were sort of concerned about, like, was John okay? And it was like, it could look like I was kind of falling apart in a way. And that was there in a sense, like it was pretty gritty. I would not have wished it on anyone. But at the same time, it was like there was this knowing that there was nothing wrong. There was nothing out of place about any of that. Like it was not, like all was fine. Like even though from another perspective, all was really shitty and falling apart. And this may sound ridiculous, but and it was not conceptual. It was much more visceral. It was a sense of like, no, because the actual experience of something like grief is like everything else. this pure, transcendent mystery as to what it actually is. And when you start to become more familiar with that aspect of our experience, that's not merely the way we're describing it and holding it conceptually, it opens us up to something that's astonishing about everything, that's remarkable about everything, that's in a human context that equates to, again, more enjoyment and less suffering, I guess is how I would put it.
My wife and I lost our 6-year-old son back in 1992. He passed away in our arms. He came home with a stomach virus, and in the middle of the night, 5 a.m. in the morning, he started throwing up and aspirated, went into his lungs, and we were holding him at that moment of him transitioning. And the grief was, as you can imagine, didn't take place until the shock of what was happening, and the police showed up, and the emergency people showed up, and they tried to save him. And the grief came immediately after the realization the next day that he was gone. But because of our being with the guru for the amount of time we were, and the teachings that we got, and the understanding that we had, and the meditations that we were capable of doing, this wave came over us, and I can still feel it now. It vibrated from my root chakra all the way up through all the chakras and out the top of my head. And it was an understanding of that's the way it is. And it is part of the beauty of all that is. And it immediately was able to bring us to a place of peace. I'm grateful that I was able to experience that transition. And even when the thought comes back into my mind, as I'm sure it does to you, John, many years later, there's always that sense of understanding that it's all greater than we perceive it to be. And that's what I'm trying to really understand here.
That's the whole thing. This is where we're supposed to be. You know, okay, I have a link. I want to get I love giving plugs. So I'm a big guy for plugs. I love plugging my stuff. And here's the great irony. So now here's the link. So we're getting ready for this interview with Dena and John, and I'm saying, all right. I mean, I'm familiar with all this stuff, but maybe there'll be some points I want to bring up. So I get an email from John, his latest Substack essay, "The Groundless Ground," and I'm going through it, and I'm checking things off. Oh, this would be good. I'm going to ask Dena this. Oh, I'm going to ask Dena that. Now I have all the check marks. So here's my link. People watching this, right? People watching this thing saying, all this stuff coming up, got a lot of things question. And we'll post that we can post a link to this. It's just an essay, a few pages essay. Everything, bar none, that was spoken about today spontaneously. We just jumped in, right? Everything that was discussed today is perfectly outlined or pointed to, or whatever you want to call it. You know, we know the limitation using words, but as Dena pointed out in the book club earlier, you know, words are it too. The cliff notes are not separate from the book. So words. As far as words go, if you read this essay, it'll throw great light on everything that's been said here too. Now, my big point, because you know I always harp on this. And I'm Johnny One Note, right? This is it. There's no place to go. There's no other realm. There's no next incarnation. Well, if there is, there is. But I'm just saying the point is, and I want to put a plug in for Peter Brown's book. He's got 2 of them, but this one we're studying in a group that I run. So the point is, the yoga of radiant presence, according to me, This also could be called the yoga of aliveness, because it's about aliveness. It's not about philosophy. I'm reminded of this quote. I'm reminded of Bill Moyers is interviewing Joseph Campbell for the whatever, the Power of Myth, whatever that series was years ago. And he says, well, we're looking for meaning. And Joseph Campbell said, no, we're not looking for meaning. That's philosophy, right? That's conceptuality. We're looking for aliveness. So what this is all about is just that. It's aliveness. And I think as Dena and John, it's not anywhere but in our own direct experience, not our ideas about it, not our philosophy about, the way things are. It's how they show up here, because all there is it. So anyway, I think that's one of the points Dena makes and John make all the time. There's nothing to fix. You don't need tools in your quiver. Now you're having a problem. And I love what Dena said. There are no exercises and practices to get to the now, because where else could you be? How could you be out of the now? So anyway, I love this stuff. I'm a big fan. And it's not just I love it. Philosophically, conceptually, I love it because more fun, less suffering. Or play. It's a play. It's like you're in the world, but not of it. That kind of idea. Although they're not two things. They're not two things. But, you can play. And yes, and sometimes there's a bitch. It's not philosophy. It's direct experience. That's what I keep kind of hammering home to myself. And if I'm in conversation, it's not about somebody's idea of something. Now, Stefan and I go way back, and John has mentioned, I don't know about Dena, John has mentioned exploring different spiritual paths. And all those paths are what we call progressive paths. We start at the beginning, and we go through all these things, and maybe 18 incarnations down the road, you attain God realization. I mean, that's the general idea, because you're starting from scratch. This path, and I'm glad you brought in Hatha Yoga, because Hatha Yoga is the same, little different, but the same kind of thing. You're starting at the end. You're not starting in the beginning and having to go through these loops and hoops and please gurus and do all kinds of things to get to some imagined place, because, it's all airy-fairy. What does God realization mean? What does it mean? Self-realization, God realization, until you can satisfy yourself that, okay, I got it. But the point is, this starts at the end. You are here and you are it, and this is it.
So, all right. But for those who are starting at the beginning and have no idea what we're talking about, there must be a way to explain it in 2 sentences or a short paragraph that'll explain exactly what you're trying to convey here. And that's all I want to do. I want people who have no idea what it's like to, meditate or do anything like that, and are interested in finding out about this, besides reading the book, The Yoga of Radiant Presence, if you could just explain in simple terms, in, 5 sentences or less, what exactly it is.
So just to be clear, do you want us to explain, can you say a little bit more about what you're wanting clarified around
Yes.
all of this? Yeah.
Okay. So I'm your 13-year-old son, and I come to you and I say, look, what's going on here in my life? What is it? Can you explain to me, really, Dad, what the truth is all about and how I get there?
I mean, I'll take a crack at that. Yeah, we're living this life. We call it, living this life, as human beings existing in this world and trying to navigate this world. And as part of that whole process of living a life, whether we're 13 or 103 years old, we're still seem to be navigating this reality. And we do all the things that we do, and we try to find our way, and we try to find some measure of happiness and fulfillment in the process of living this life. And as part of living this life, we have ways of conceiving what it is and talking about it and using language to talk about it, right? As we're doing right now. So, and as part of that, we tend to kind of assume that we know what we're talking about because we have language. I know what things are because I have, I get afraid and I know what that is, and I have a way of describing that. And I say, hey, Mom or Dad or your friend, I'm afraid, right? Because I've got a way to characterize that experience. And what turns out to be a really illuminating, fascinating, potentially life-changing a question to ask, which is, what is my experience? What is actually happening? Yes, I have words to describe my experience, seemingly, whether I call it fear or joy or sorrow or heartbreak or aliveness or whatever ways I might be characterizing things with my words and my concepts. What's actually present, what's actually happening? And we can explore that. We can explore our experience in the same way a scientist might get curious about how the world is made, like what things are made of scientifically. Things are made of molecules, and the molecules are made of atoms, and the atoms are made of subatomic particles. There's this really fascinating and, in my experience, kind of life-changing similar exploration we can take up, which is, what is our human experience in the same way? Like what makes our human experience what we think it is? Like what is it made of? In the same way, again, a scientist might explore what the material world is made of. What is it made of? And that exploration is it's fun, it's eye-opening, it's and it reveals, in my experience, that this reality, this experience that we're having, is much, 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 much more than we could possibly imagine. It's filled with so much more than the mind could ever conceive, and discovering that is it's very enriching. It's very life transforming. It's very freeing in so many ways. And anyway, that might be a starting point for attempting to characterize to someone who is more naive to, say the kinds of things we talk about, what we're pointing to. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to ask Dena the same question, and not your son, but if your daughter came to you and asked you the same question, how would you answer it for her?
Yeah, well, first off, I loved John's answer. I would hope I could be that eloquent as this was. But I guess I would also, again, to someone who, like you said, is hasn't been around the spiritual block, so to speak. First of all, I think that would be a huge advantage in many ways. But I guess, I would just probably start with, everything is real. Every experience, the loss that you talked about, the experience of sitting here talking to another person, everything is real, but nothing is what you think it is. Nothing is what you can think it is. So find out what it is. Find out what it is before you tell it what it is, before you name it, before you describe it, before you compare it. That's the essence of the exploration, as John was talking about, and explore it like a good scientist explores it. A good scientist doesn't go into an experiment with an idea of what he wants to prove. He goes in not knowing. Let's see what this is. Let's see what happens. And so everything is real, but it's not what you think it is. What is it? So check out your experience for yourself, and notice there are things you can notice. For example, you'll notice that whatever you think it is, or whatever you can say about it, what it actually is far transcends that. So if you jumped in a swimming pool, to use the analogy I was using earlier, you could say, I just jumped in a swimming pool, and what I can say about it is it was wet and it was water. Okay, fine, that's what you can say about it. But what was the actual feeling of it? You couldn't in a million years communicate that in words, but yet you know it. You know it intimately. You know it specifically. You know it exactly. So that's one thing you can notice about what this is that whatever experience you happen to be having in the moment, you can't say anything about it. You can't capture it in words. Whatever you say is going to be an oversimplification. It's going to always be more than what you can say about it. Another thing you could realize about what this is notice that you can never have the exact same experience twice. Every single time it's new, it's different. Even if you slept in the same bedroom for 50 years and you never redecorated, you never painted the walls, you woke up in the exact same bedroom for 50 years. Every single morning, that first moment, it's different. It might be subtly different. It might be almost exactly the same as it was the day before. But as Peter would say, saying that something is almost exactly the same is just a euphemism for saying it's completely different. It's not the same. And you can notice that in every moment. Experience never repeats itself. It's always something you've never seen. What you're seeing right now, what you're experiencing right now, you've never experienced before. And now it's already different. And now it's already different. Like, that's weird. So one of the things you start to notice when you look at experience directly is how weird it is, how strange it is, how it doesn't fit into our sort of conventional worldview of what everything is. It's really strange. Another example is you can only find right now. Where does experience happen? Now. You can recall something that maybe you remember had happened, but where is that memory happening? It's happening now. It's also always happening here. Always. I'm in a high rise. There's a building, looks like a long way off. Where is that building appearing in my experience? Here. If I think of a trip I made recently to Vienna, and I'm thinking of Vienna, where is Vienna appearing right now? Here. So I start to notice these weird things about my experience, and I start to see that, oh, this is not what I thought it was. This is something way different. And so, as John was saying, it begins to seduce you into, wow, this is really weird. This is really strange. This is always more and other than what I think it is. And so that's the beginning of sort of checking out what this is and seeing that it's not the limited, fixed, conventional idea that you think it is. And to me, that's where the yoga really begins.
Because I work with students who are studying psychology, part of my work, and I'm introducing this stuff to them. They're training to be therapists, and many of them are quite young, not all of them, but they're graduate students. And one of the things I've noticed is that they hear a lot of the things that, like Dena and I were talking about, and they hear it as philosophy. And they think, wow, sometimes they'll even say, I didn't know I was taking a philosophy class. And so they're hearing it as ideas, and they're kind of like, not always, but there's this sense of like, so what? Like, some people will just be absolutely, like the way Dena was talking about, like exploring this and being curious and seduced by it and discovering how weird it is. Some people will be seduced by it and just drawn into the curiosity of the exploration. I think for other people, at least in my experience, what often will draw them in is they're looking for some resolution of their own challenging life challenges, their suffering. And this often brings people to different spiritual teachings, as we all know. There's some sense of there's something not quite right, there's something missing, or I read things about how wonderful life could be, and I kind of feel like I'm living my crappy life, and that sounds a lot better. So that impetus, that search for something, often the resolution of something or something better, is often driving it. And I do often speak to that and to say that, discovering, because you could say, well, discovering that this isn't what you think it is, like, who gives a shit about that? Like, it's fine to know that it is what I think it is. Like, why do I have to know any more than that? Well, you don't. But I do make a point, especially with my graduate students who are training to work with other people around their suffering, psychological suffering, is that if something is occurring experientially, what is it that makes it a seeming problem that we have to overcome? Well, the lion's share of that is being defined into existence, that there's something wrong about the experience, that it represents a threat in some way, that it's something that is problematic, and so on. And so this discovery that experience is not what we think it is. This is why, and Peter himself would talk about this not infrequently, how liberating it is to discover this, because we're liberated from our ideas of what things are. We discover that if the world's not what I think it is, nothing about it is what I can conceive of it to be, we're in a very real sense liberated from all the seeming implications of our language. Like, I'm an individual and I'm traumatized or overwhelmed or stressed out by X, Y, or Z, right? That's a very classic sort of way a human will describe their life. But when you explore experience and discover, oh my God, it absolutely transcends everything that we think of it to be. It's free of that by its very nature. That opens up this window into this other way of encountering life, which is there's not actually an individual stuck in anything or overwhelmed by anything from this perspective. There's just this inconceivable, infinite, unresolvable radiance, for lack of a better way to describe it. And that provides a kind of, it's not a panacea to our human challenges, but it puts it in a context of profound, in a sense, it's like resolving the problems of life, the seeming problems of our human existence, by realizing there aren't any at all, which doesn't preclude us solving problems that we're encountering in life, fixing our broken washing machine or healing a wound or, taking care of life stuff. Like, that can all be there. And then there's also this other understanding that, wow, that's all being in one very real sense dreamed into existence, defined into existence by the way we're holding it conceptually. And so it opens up this entirely different kind of vantage, if you will, on what's happening here, which is free. Krishnamurti called it freedom from the known of what we think the world is, what we think we are, and discovering it's unthinkable. And in its unthinkableness, it's utterly free of language and conceptualization and all the seeming implications that flow forth from, oh my God, this is something that I have to do something about, to put it in simple terms. It's not really like that.
I'm curious about one thing, though. Suffering is such a deep feeling. And right now we're in the midst of two very heavy wars going on the planet. And when you watch what's going on there are people with not only their homes, but their countries just being turned into rubble. They have no food. And I'm wondering how one lives in that kind of a situation and is able to raise themselves above, or is that just the experience that they're having and, it's not going to happen for them? Your take on this whole idea of life has to imbue itself in everything that's around, because there is basically nothing. It's just our perceptions of it. So how do we move out of these perceptions to live in every situation that we're confronted every single day, to the depth of something as bad as war and death? I look at these people that are suffering every single day and I don't know how they get through it. And I have empathy for them. But can you live the radiance of presence in that kind of situation?
I mean, you shared a story earlier, man, it doesn't get much more gritty than what you described of losing a child, a 6-year-old child suddenly gone from your life. And you talked, about how some of your own understanding about reality seemed like it played some kind of role in you being able to orient to that experience in a way that, I mean, I can't fathom it. Like, I'm a father. Like, it's unthinkable, like what that would be like in a human way, like the loss of that. how enormous it is. But you yourself talked about how there seemed like there was this way of, at the same time, without denying the absolute heartbreak that must have been, where there was some kind of knowing that you were experiencing. You attributed it to, your own study and spiritual practices, and I don't deny that at all. But I mean, it pointed to, I think, in some ways, the answer to your question, which is there is that possibility of seeing even the grittiest of like human moments in this different light, in this different context, which is a much, you could say, vaster context, which doesn't, interestingly, negate the human context at all, not in the least. It doesn't like whitewash it. It doesn't bypass it. It doesn't pretend as if it didn't happen. It's just seeing that the way we, from the human perspective, and as part of that, the way we hold it kind of conceptually and see it as being something there that's identifiable, that I know what it is, and knowing what it is, I know that I experience it as whatever, like something was ripped away from me. Like that's real experience. It's just, I mean, in the way, I would language this, it's just not the whole story, that there's more to the story, if you will, in the sense of it so exceeds what we think it is. I mean, it's impossible to say that more strongly, that it's, I think we might have talked about this when we chatted before, when you just were speaking to me that one time, and we had a conversation on your channel, that we can explore our moment-to-moment experience and discover many things about it that don't correlate with the way we think reality is. And one of the most profound ways it doesn't actually align with our concepts about it is that our experience doesn't have any enduring nature to it, actually. What we call the present moment, you were talking about that earlier, whether it's a moment we might describe as total elation or catastrophic, like despair and heartbreak, in either of those cases and everything in between, this is an amazing thing to really feel, and it's in our face if we're just kind of willing to be with it and notice it, is that what we call the moment is literally not here for any time. It's already become something else before there's any possibility of even saying what it is. It's already turned into something else. And meanwhile, we have this belief that we actually know what's going on, and we have an elaborate vocabulary to describe it, right? And it isn't to say that that's not true. The way it seems to be is true from within that frame of reference, right? Our losses, our struggles, and our triumphs and tribulations, all of it is real experiences. But at the same time, what I think, or what any of us might think has happened or is happening, is now already gone. It's already gone. That's how ungraspable. And you were talking about spirituality. I mean, you hear that term, oh, it's ungraspable, across the spiritual traditions. What the hell are they talking about, ungraspable? I can grasp hold of this with my ideas and my concepts, but if we look, we can discover that we really can. And that has, from a well-being standpoint, the most profound implications to me of benefit, to discover that this is unthinkable and ungraspable just by its very nature. And I think it has the potential, I don't know if always, because like it's a hypothetical question. If I was in Gaza, experiencing whatever, the destruction of my family or whatever was going on in Gaza for me as an individual living there, to use that example, I don't know what it would be like. It's so hypothetical. I mean, I might, who knows, maybe I would have no access to what I'm just talking about in terms of another way to perceive that particular reality besides the horror of it and the destruction of it. But I don't know, when my father was at the end of his life and he felt like he was in a hell realm, that's what it felt like to him. Losing his capacities, facing his mortality. And I kept wondering, like, well, what would it be like if he knew that this wasn't what he thought it was, that he had access to this other way of perceiving it, you could say. And the sense I had was, well, it would be fucking liberating for him. It would change what it would be like for him. And it wouldn't merely be a hell realm. It would be something that transcended that without necessarily doing away with the difficulty of it. But at the same time, I didn't know what it would be like because I wasn't in that situation. He was in that situation. And I don't know, maybe, I guess we'll always find out what it will be like if we're in any particular situation when that happens, if it happens, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you really gave. I just want to say one thing, Dena, before you go on. You gave a wonderful guidepost. There's more to the story than you think it is, and it's that exploration that I now can see intellectually, that I can explore beyond the story that I think it is, to find a much bigger space to exist in.
What I was just going to add is, in one very real sense, as John said, I can't possibly imagine what it would be like if I was in Gaza, for example, but I also can't possibly imagine what's going to happen 2 seconds from now, sitting right here. It's always going to be a surprise. But in another real sense, I know exactly what would be happening, the same thing that's happening right now, which is, again, hold words lightly, but mysterious energy presences arising in the field of my experience that I can't pin down, that I can't define, that have a very real isness to them, but I can't say what it is. That's exactly what would be happening. That's what's going to be happening on my deathbed. That's what's going to be happening 10 minutes after I die. There's just the same thing. It's the only thing that's ever happened, the only thing that will happen. Now, what will it look like? Who knows? What can it look like? Anything. How will the Dena character respond to what it looks like? Who knows? She's going to do what she does. But what it is, it's going to be the same thing it is right now.
Thank God I'm not in Gaza. I don't think I would do too well over there. But I don't. But here's the point, and I think Dena made it beautifully. John made it beautifully. I don't know. I just don't know. I like what Nisargadatta said. Somebody said, suppose somebody put a gun, because Nisargadatta was going on and on about just what we're going on about. Oh, everything is empty or whatever, not what you think it is, whatever. And said, well, suppose somebody came in here and put a gun to your head. Then what would you? He said, I don't know. I don't know. It could show up, and this is what Dena is pointing to. It could show up anyway. We don't know. If Nisargadatta doesn't know what he's going to do, certainly I don't. Right?
But you can know what it is, and I think that's sort of the essence.
And I think that is like the bottom line to all this. You can't know what it is, and it is ungraspable, unfathomable. It's not resolvable. It's mysterious. And if you want to make up a story about it, yeah, then you can have a nice story. Sorry, go ahead, Dena.
Well, you can't know what it is conceptually, but you do know what it is experientially. It's the only thing you've ever known. And the reason, even though it's, as we've been saying, it's infinitely complex, it's totally unresolvable, it has no duration, it disappears even as it appears. There's nothing you can say about it, there's nothing you can think about it, and yet you are that. You are that inconceivability. You are that inherent intelligence. You are fully equipped to meet it as it is because you're the same thing it is. You are it. So you can't know what it is intellectually, but you can't miss it experientially. It's the only thing. It's the only game in town. It's the only thing that's happening. And so that's, again, just to go back to what is the essence of this yoga, it's checking that out. And what is this? Because you can know what it is. You won't be able to say anything about it. You won't be able to describe it, but you can know it. The same way you know what it feels like to ease into a warm bath. Like, you can't describe that, but you know it intimately. It's the ultimate intimacy.
Am I right? You moved out to near where Peter Brown lived so you could get one-on-one experience with him. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So when you first came and you didn't know any of this, but you had some kind of a draw to it, when you sat down, what kind of questions would you ask him and how would he answer you?
I don't even remember what the exact questions were, but I'm sure it had to do with, because Peter wasn't really into philosophy, nor was I. Like, I wasn't really interested in, I don't know, people talking about what this is, or people trying to put what this is in a framework, because I just, in my sense, it couldn't be fit into any framework. And so whatever questions there were, they came from my direct experience. Like, what was I bumping up against? What was I noticing? How did things seem to be? And then we would begin some sort of dialogue about that, which was a mystery in and of itself. Like, there's
Sure.
the questions were mysterious, the answers were mysterious, the whole thing is mysterious.
So you used the book as a guidepost at first to learn what he was
Used the
teaching.
book. I didn't read the book until fairly recently, to be honest with you.
How did you find out about Peter Brown then?
Mystery. I think I saw a quote on the internet, and it hit me in a certain way. It was just like, I like that. And I just clicked on a link, and next thing I know, I was on this looked like a early 2000 website that didn't have any bells and whistles, but it had a whole bunch of raw audio files. And I just randomly clicked on one, and within the first 5 minutes, again, it was a sort of a visceral, like, he knows what he knows what I'm looking for. And there was just a resonance. Who knows why that happens? There was just a resonance. And so that was just sort of the beginning of my interaction with Peter Brown. And again, I don't even know what Peter Brown is. I don't, I can't, it's hard to, that's why there's no way to put anyone on a pedestal or to turn anyone into a guru. I can't even know what that was. The experience was real, but I can't really say what it was. It's just what happened.
I mean, I could tell you about a moment that happened, whatever, 20 plus years ago, that was certainly, I would say, a seminal moment of, I would say, recognizing that what I'd been searching for a couple of decades was actually what I was experiencing. Like that was shocking. That I had read books about and was practicing, becoming more present and finding the divine presence. And it's like, that's exactly what we're experiencing. And it was shocking on so many levels, but particularly because I'd been going about it under the assumption that it was missing, which is why I was looking for it. And it was like, oh my God, like, not only is it here already, but it's literally like what everything is made of, and it's what I'm made of. It is what I am, is this presence, this inconceivable presence of, I don't know, life is one of my favorite words to try to describe it, because, to Gary's point, it's like, it's pure aliveness. It's like, feels like this vitality, this aliveness. And I actually, funny enough, Gary, that story I think you were telling about Joseph Campbell and on being interviewed by Bill Moyers, and I actually talked about that in the introduction to my first book. And I remember that I was really struck by that comment, like, oh no, whatever, was Joseph Campbell's like opinion based on reading all these myths, that what human beings are searching for fundamentally is this sense of aliveness. And I wrote in the intro to my book, like, isn't that interesting? Because that's exactly what we're experiencing, is complete aliveness. But we have this reality, if you will, plays this game or does this dance of seeming to miss itself. It's like, it's pure aliveness. And so, yeah. So, but one of the reasons I'm hesitant to talk about like past experiences is that I'm much more interested with the experience of it now, and that's just a memory. And it feels like people often in some of these circles are very interested in talking about their awakening experiences, as they call them. And it's like, this is the awakening experience right now. This moment's completely awake by virtue of it being here and appearing. That's what I would call its wakefulness. And And to me also, I think part of the hesitation of talking about a moment where it all sort of came together is it just feels like as we've been talking about all this whole conversation, that this is infinite. It doesn't have a final conclusion. So it's not like arriving at some final, from my standpoint, like realization, as much as just this ongoing, never ending, seemingly reality exploring itself, and discovering itself and its infinity. And how could that have an end to it? So that's where my travels seem to have taken me, is to that sense of this is endless in its the discovery of what it is. There's no finality to that.
I moved from that model too. The old model was in our old days with the guru and teaching is, okay, there is there's an end point. Okay, we can label it God realization. And there's like, we're working towards a specific goal. And once we get here, now we are, one of these enlightened, whatever, masters or whatever. But that was my orientation. I've spent many years, going down that road. Now my orientation has shifted to like, no, there's no endpoint where now I'm a realized master. That whole idea is just like, it just falls apart because it's ever ongoing. It's an endless thing. Hence the title of your latest Substack article, The Groundless Ground. There's no ground. There's no place to settle because it's ever irresolvable. And I love this. There's one word I got from Peter Brown's books and discussions and everything is unresolvability. It's and you mentioned in the book, speaking of book club, hey, hold on, more plugs. Here's Peter Brown's other book, compilation, Liberation Beyond Imagination, that you and Dena are hosting, and you mentioned koan. Now as far as I'm concerned, and I really don't want to get involved in any spiritual practices, but if there is one, it's the koan of it's like what is this? What is this? You want to make something up? Okay, go ahead, knock yourself out. But koan is, from my understanding, it's not meant to be understood intellectually. Like, it's to kind of, be in the mystery until it, if it does, reveal itself. But you're not gonna crack it on your own. So I like the koan idea. Like, I can stop any point. Like, what is this? I don't know, and I don't want to make up a story anymore. I'm tired of stories.
Well, seeing as how reality can look like anything, there actually is an endpoint to my participation here because I have another appointment I have to drive to and I need to start getting ready pretty soon. So
thanks, Dena. This was great. I thought the book club was great. This was the book club on steroids for me because it was so focused and direct. There weren't 100 people there, So this was like, whoa. Okay, John, what's your final aliveness?
Well, I'm going to quote our friend Peter Brown, if I may, and in his final satsang, he was like his last one he gave, and he was like very close to passing. And one of the things he said in that, well, how long was that, Dena? It was like very short, like just a few minutes, and 6 or 7 minutes, I think. And at one point, just in his, I don't know, in a passionate way, he just said, just check out what's happening here, because it will astonish you beyond imagination. And yeah, that's what I have to say.
Stefan, you're going to have the final word this time for the first time in a long time.
I have one more quote, okay, to end this on, because it's going to tie some of our conversation together in a sweet way. Comes from Shakespeare, hey, the master of words. This was in the introduction to my last book. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
I have no final words for this conversation. I'm just going to say it's been great. You guys are fantastic. I like all the signposts that you gave me, especially the one, John, that there's more to the story than you have any idea about. And just explore it, because I think that's what people have to do. They can't stop down the street where the stop sign is and say there's no further way to go. They have to keep on going down the road. Anyway, thank you all very much.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.